How's it going, everyone? DBD has an enormous balance change coming sometime this summer. Around 40 perks are going to be changed. Not only are the most used perks in the game like DS, Dead Art, Corrupt Intervention, and BBQ and Chili getting nerfed, but the weakest perks in the game are going to be seeing changes as well. So in this video, I'll not only be going through the best 20 killer and survivor perks and be completely nerfing or reworking them, but I'll also be buffing or reworking the weakest 20 perks in the game too. Alright, now there are some things we need to discuss before we get into the perk changes. Otherwise, you might lose your mind, or I might lose my mind saying the same thing over 100 times. There are baseline gameplay changes coming to DBD along with these perk changes. A lot of the most used perks in the game are used as band-aid fixes for severe issues with game balance. I'm making these perk changes based on the assumption that behavior is going to address those core issues to at least some degree. There is no point to rework a perk and make it do the same exact thing it already achieves in a slightly different way. We are nerfing perks today, no matter how necessary they are for DBD to work properly in its current form. Now, coming up with these changes, I used a mix of YouTube, Reddit, DBD forums, and obviously my own personal experience. So if you see an idea that you've seen somewhere else before, please do not shit your pants. A few of these ideas are not wholly mine. Lastly, I'm giving a big salt warning before we start. The DBD community is fiercely protective of their favorite meta perks, and I'm about to murder them one by one. Okay? Fun. Let's get started. We are starting off with the most used killer perks in the game, and number one is BBQ and Chili at 43.72%. Now, coming up with the change for BBQ is hard because BBQ, in my opinion, is probably the healthiest perk in the entire game. So it's a bit sad to change it. And I don't think that BBQ and Chili is that strong of a perk. I think people mostly used it for the blood point bonus, which means that when it came to reworking this perk, I had to come up with something that it made the perk better, but also got rid of the blood point bonus, because with the blood point bonus, it's going to get used no matter what, even if it doesn't do anything. So BBQ and Chili is now Scourge Hook Chef's Kiss. When a survivor is hooked on a Scourge hook, see the aura of survivors further than 40 meters from the hook and gain 5% haste status effect for 10 seconds. That means you get 10 seconds of increased speed plus 10 seconds of seeing the survivor's auras, which is very strong in my opinion and worthy of being a Scourge hook perk. I hope that this still achieves what BBQ and Chili always intended to achieve, which is to get killers away from hooks and make them want to pressure the map and pressure survivors. Now, don't get caught up on the names too much. I just felt like BBQ and Chili is such an iconic name for a perk that there needed to be an entirely new name to change it. All right, moving on to our next perk, Corrupt Intervention. Now, this again was a very hard one to do because Corrupt Intervention has one goal in mind, basically to make it to where you don't get gen rushed at the very beginning of a game. So I reworked this perk multiple times, and every time I reworked it, it was just another perk that slowed the game down at the start, which means that the perk is going to get used just as much as it would have been used before, even if it was less effective. So I decided to go with an entirely different avenue with this perk, and the new Corrupt Intervention blocks all totems from being interacted with for the first 5 minutes of a match. Now, the purpose of this rework was to get you to use hex totems without that fear of, oh, they're going to get destroyed in the first second of a match. I think it's a really good idea for a perk. The hard part was coming up with the right amount of time that the hex totems are blocked for, because we already have this in the game. You can see it with perks like Hex Pentimento and Hex Plaything. Essentially, you can see the totem if it's a hex or not. It's just blocked and you can't interact with it. So you can still track where the totems are and then come back to them at the end of the 5 minutes. The one big thing that's going to come to mind with this perk is Devour Hope. Are you going to be able to get Devour Hope in 5 minutes? And I don't think so. I think that if you're able to get Devour Hope active within the first 5 minutes of a match, that was a match you were probably going to win anyway, because it means you're downing survivors at an extremely fast rate. Now let's just hope behavior does something to maybe address the early game so that you do not lose the match before you get your first down. Then comes discordance. Discordance means something like in harmony, two things that don't work well together. So I try to keep that theme of a perk that punishes you somewhat for trying to work on a generator with another player. I'm not sure. This one might actually be a buff. I may have screwed up. After a survivor hits a successful good skill check, all other survivors on the same generator will have to hit the same skill check as a great skill check, or the generator will lose 5% progress. So this kind of works like a built-in old ruin when multiple people are working on the same generator. It's just not as strong, because if the first survivor hits a great skill check instead of a good skill check, which isn't that hard to do if you have a good frame rate, all the other survivors will get an old ruin skill check where they'll have to hit the great skill check in order not to lose progress. The speed in which survivors are able to complete generators when there's two people working on them means that I think that this perk will be marginal. It won't be as noticeable as Old Ruin was, where it just completely made it impossible to do generators sometimes. It also doesn't affect the first person at all. Like if the first person hits a good skill check, the generator's not going to regress. So it's only kind of working for one person or all the multiple people on the generator. I think it's a cool idea for a perk. I don't think it would be too strong, and it would even incentivize survivors to split up on generators. I think where this might be too strong is 3-gen situations. Next up, we have Ruin, again going under the knife for another rework. So when I was trying to come up with a change for Ruin, I tried to think of like, what is the benefit of Ruin and what's the problem with Ruin? And the benefit of Ruin is it rewards killers for pressuring generators. It rewards you for going to a generator that you normally maybe wouldn't have gone for and pushing survivors off of it. But at the same time, it's really, really strong for killers that are highly mobile and can push you off generators easily, because then they can just bounce between gens and basically completely destroy all of your progress unless you find the hex, which means that survivors just look for the hex and destroy it immediately, thus kind of making the perk even worthless in a way. So I wanted to keep that element of rewarding you without making high mobility killers get overly rewarded with this perk. So now instead of Hex Ruin, we have Hex Fast as Fuck Boy. And of course, that name is not real. But here's what it does. When there are no survivors within a 16-meter radius of the killer's base movement speed is increased by 20%, which is just 5% more than 3 stacks of Play With Your Food. So it's not that over the top. It acts a little bit like Whispers in the sense that if there's a survivor near you and you slow down, you're like, hey, there's someone next to me, and then you can maybe look around for them. But no high mobility killer would want to use this hex because they're already fast. So this isn't going to do anything for them. This is going to go on killers that are slow and don't have map pressure like Clown and need to get around a little bit faster. So I think that this achieves what Ruin was trying to achieve originally, maybe just in a more healthy way. So if you get a really huge map, you're not just completely screwed now because you're a killer who has 0 map pressure. Now, this one kind of surprised me. I didn't think Jolt or Surge took up 10% of the pick rate. Maybe it's because it's like the only gen defense perk that's base in the game now, but whatever. It's one of the top 10 most used killer perks now, so we got to take it out behind the barn. Now, I think what Jolt achieved was it stopped survivors from doing gens near you that were close to being finished, right? So like the gens like 80%, you down somebody and it gives you just enough time to maybe hook the person and use pop on the gen and save it. So I wanted to kind of keep that theme to some degree, but you do not save the gen anymore. If a survivor finishes a generator within 12 meters of the killer, the generator explodes, causing the survivors to lose 1 health state and suffer from the exhausted status effect. This is that perk that's now going to really punish survivors for finishing gens in your face, and it has massive clutch potential. Like if one survivor is injured and another survivor is healthy and they're rushing a gen right in your face, now one of the survivors is going to immediately go down. The other survivor is going to become injured and exhausted and allow you to just finish them off really quickly and maybe completely turn a game around just because the survivors got greedy and did a generator in your face. Now, I don't know if I would call this one a nerf per se. I actually think it's a pretty cool perk. I might use this because I never use Jolt, I'll be honest. I'm curious what you guys think on this one. In comes Noed, everybody's most hated, used 17.97% of the time. Personally, I never had an issue with it, but it does have to get reworked, right? So I thought, what do we do to make it to where it Still a strong perk, but it doesn't have the insta down anymore, because I think that's the thing that people are annoyed about. So now we have, if a survivor escapes the trial while this totem is still active, they lose all of their blood points earned in the trial and they receive a matchmaking ban. I'm kidding. The real change is that it's no longer a hex totem and you get a permanent 6% movement speed increase for the remainder of the trial, and survivors can no longer leave the trial while in the dying state. So you don't have to worry about survivors crawling out of the trial anymore or heal tech. It gives you that little bit more of a presence in the end game. It's not a hex anymore, so it has a purpose to be used, because I don't think this is strong enough to be a hex. It's just about either getting some more kills or pushing people out of the trial as fast as possible. It's just another end game perk like any other end game perk in the game. And it's just not that apocalyptic anymore as Noed would sometimes be. I think overall this is a pretty good change. Scourge Hook Pain Resonance, used 17.46% of the time. A perk that I think, again, was really, really good for killers that couldn't get around the map. They could still pressure gens that are 1,000 miles away that they could never walk to in time with Pop Goes the Weasel. So kind of like Ruin, I wanted to keep that theme. Like, how do we benefit low mobility killers with this perk, but not overly reward high mobility killers? And it's very difficult to do that without just making it like a movement speed thing, but this is the change I came up with. Each time a survivor is hooked on a Scourge Hook, the following effects apply. The generator with the most progress transfers to the generator with the least progress and begins regressing at 100% speed, which is normal speed. If you kick a generator, it's not very fast. And transfers of generator progress will never exceed 99%. So if you know they have a generator at 50% completion, it won't transfer to a generator that's at 50% completion and then instantly complete. It'll go to 99 and start regressing. It's just gonna displace generator progress. I'm not 100% sure if this one's even possible. Like, I don't know if this could be coded in the game. I do think it's an interesting perk though, and it also doesn't replace BBQ and Chili. Like, I feel like the original Pain Resonance replaced BBQ and Chili. Like, if you didn't care about blood points anymore, Pain Resonance was way more beneficial to you, because it showed you not only the generator that was closest to being finished, but if there were survivors still working on the generator, you got that information as well. So hopefully we can see now like Pain Resonance and BBQ and Chili maybe mixed together, as I do think they synergize now and they make a good combo. Pop Goes the Weasel. I think this was the second most used killer perk, 25.32% of the time. It, again, like BBQ and Chili, I think it was one of the more healthy perks in the game, only made maybe too strong by killers like Nerfs and Blight, who got a lot of value out of it over other killers. But there's just something about Pop Goes the Weasel, even the name, like Pop Goes the Weasel. You kick that generator and it's like, boom, you take a huge chunk of the progress away and you get like rewarded. So that was the thing I wanted to keep the most with the rework. So the new Pop Goes the Weasel, every time you hit a survivor with a basic attack, you gain a token. Each token grants an instant 3% reduction to the next generator kicked. All tokens are lost when kicking a generator. Now, obviously this couldn't work with Legion because that would be broken, so they'd have to make that not work. But what this is doing is, it's every time you're hitting a survivor, you're getting this little bit of added reduction, right? So you could just see a gen that's like close to being done, and say you have like, you know, 5 tokens, you kick the generator, it loses like 15%. It gives you that little bit of time. Or you could save it up for the end game when there's, you know, only 3 generators left and you have 75% worth of regression stacked up, and they have this gen about to be done. You kick it, boom, it's back to 0, and it gives you like this chance for a comeback in the end game. Does what Pop did in a way. It's not wholeheartedly different. It's not on this like cooldown anymore, and you can just use it when you need it. I think it's a cool perk and that it would still get used. As far as it requiring a basic attack, I literally just put that in there because of Legion, and I think that Legion's Feral Frenzy counts as a basic attack anyway, so maybe that doesn't work and isn't necessary. But yeah, trying to stay with the theme of making gen regression perks work better on killers that have low mobility. Now we have Thana, the Fear of Dying. Thana is always kind of, in my opinion, one of the most boring perks in the entire game. It's not that I haven't used it, it's just that it's literally like, it's such a passive boring perk. So the new Thana is, when a survivor is within 8 meters of an injured survivor, they constantly hear the killer's terror radius and their skill check success zones are reduced by 40%. So now it really kind of carries that like fear of death element to it. So if you're doing a generator and an injured person comes over and starts doing the generator with you, it's really going to screw with you because you're going to see them like dying and you're going to like freak out, right? So that's what it does. And I think it's a cooler perk now that could be used in more interesting builds. Then we have Tinkerer. Tinkerer used to just be like really bad, and then they made it like really good, and it's always sort of done the same thing though, which is like a stealth perk, which I've always thought that that's maybe a little bit weird. So the new Tinkerer's toolboxes now regress generators instead of progressing them. If a generator falls below 0%, it will explode and be blocked for 10 seconds. So there's a little bit we need to talk about this change. So the new Tinkerer, if you're a little bit confused right now, it's kind of meant to be the Lightborn for toolboxes. So it's supposed to just be a completely anti-toolbox perk. And you might just be thinking like, why would I ever bring that? Well, don't forget that we're getting perk loadouts in the next update. You're going to be able to see, hey, all these guys are using toolboxes. Let me switch on my anti-toolbox build real quick. Boom, you have Tinkerer. So what'll happen is if at the start of the game they go to a generator and they immediately get on the gen and start using their toolbox, it's going to fall below 0%, it's going to explode and be blocked for 10 seconds. And the 10 seconds of being blocked will just probably make them move away from the generator, making them maybe a little bit easier to see as you're heading towards it. And there we have it, all of the killer perk nerf reworks. But we also have the killer perk buff reworks coming up right now. Up first, we have Beast of Prey, a perk that was used 1.4% of the time. And Beast of Prey was a bloodlust based perk, and the issue is that everybody hates bloodlust. So when I was looking around for ideas on how to change this perk, it was always something that increased bloodlust in some way. But the problem is that everyone hates bloodlust because for them it feels cheap that someone just basically follows you for long enough until they become 1,000 miles an hour and hit you. So I kept that in mind with this rework. You now gain Bloodlust 50% faster. Bloodlust no longer increases your movement speed, instead the following occurs. Tier 1, your red stain disappears. Tier 2, your vault speed increases by 25%. And Tier 3, the aura of any survivor within 16 meters is revealed to you. So what that's going to do is you're still going to have to earn the hit. It's just you're going to be getting more and more help as you try to get the hit. And then if the survivor is really just god tier and you can't hit them even with these increases in your ability to chase, you get the aura there, and maybe you'll see a survivor that is closer hiding somewhere and you can get a free hit on them and then break off and start a different chase with a different survivor. Simple rework, but I think this is a better perk. Now we have Claustrophobia with 1% usage rate again. Claustrophobia has always been a very niche perk, never very beneficial, and without Tinkerer, it essentially is a worthless perk in my opinion, so I kept all of that in mind. Claustrophobia now blocks all vault locations within a 32 meters of a completed generator until another generator is completed. In addition, you receive a loud noise cue when a generator is 90% complete, so old Tinkerer is now a little bit built into Claustrophobia. You don't get the stealth anymore. It's only 90%. It's just enough to give you that I need to start heading in this direction. And it's going to like dynamically change the map throughout a game. So a generator gets completed in an area that's maybe very important, and now all vault locations in that region are going to be blocked until the next gen is finished, and it's really going to open up new gameplay scenarios that normally never would have been opened up before throughout a match. And I think that that's going to make people want to use it more than they would have before. Fire Up. Fire Up has always been like a real trashy perk. Like every once in a while it can get you something, but generally it's never used, as you can see, 1%. And with Freddy, I feel like Freddy's whole thing is like the end game, right? So Fire Up does work towards the end game, but a lot of the things it gives you aren't that important in the end game. It works exactly the same as the original Fire Up, except that you get an additional 1%. So now every time a generator is completed, you get 5% instead of 4%. But in addition to that, exit gate progress will now revert at 50%. So now we have a perk that reverts exit gate progress so that you're forcing the survivors to open the exit gate, which is going to open up a lot more potential for Blood Warden plays. Freddy's perks together now are very strong. So I think this is a cool change for Fire Up. Then we have Grim Embrace, a pretty new perk that's also a gen defense perk that only has a pick rate of 0.52%, which is insanely low. Nobody uses this perk, and I'll explain why nobody uses this perk. Nobody uses this perk because it gives you a very marginal reward for playing really, really nice, and the reward is to kind of play like a dick because there's really no benefit to activating Grim Embrace and then going out and looking for a survivor who's hiding somewhere near a generator that's almost finished. The only real benefit of it is to hook 4 survivors and then try to camp a health state out of the survivor you just hooked, and that health state won't even kill them. They'll just go back to second stage, and that's even if you're able to pull it off, because now the other survivors have nothing to do but heal themselves and come over and try to get a borrowed time rescue. So it's just this perk that works against itself in every sense of the way. So I completely reworked it. The new Grim Embrace grants you the ability for the entity to break walls and pallets for you while carrying survivors. Breaking actions pause the wiggle timer. And the reason I said that the entity breaks pallets for you is because this way the devs don't have to create 30 new animations for breaking pallets while carrying survivors. Definitely not the craziest perk in the world. It's just there for those builds where you're maybe trying to do a basement build or something like that. I know, again, a little bit toxic. If they wanted to add something else to this perk, they can make it to where you don't get stunned by pallets anymore while carrying survivors, which I think that might be necessary as well. Now we have the least used perk in the entire game, Hangman's Trick. And they tried to rework this perk not too long ago to make it used a little bit more, and it just didn't work. Nobody uses it still. So the new Hangman's Noose hooks take 100% longer to be sabotaged, and survivors who attempt to sabotage a hook gain the exposed status effect for 40 seconds. So this is now the definitive anti-sabo perk. It's not, hey, look, there's a guy who's about to go sabotage my hook and there's nothing I can do about it. Now it's going to take him twice as long to sabotage your hook, and if he even attempts to do it, whether he succeeds or fails, he's going to be exposed for 40 seconds. So there could be a real momentum shift in the game if someone tries to sabotage the hook and you M1 them while you're carrying somebody because maybe you have agitation or something, and now you have a survivor down and you have a survivor on the hook because they got greedy and they tried to sabo. So again, with the perk loadouts, you see some toolboxes in your game, you think maybe these guys are up to no good, boom, you throw on your anti-sabo build and you're good to go. Up next, we have Hex the Third Seal. Now, Hex the Third Seal has always been a perk that's like bad, not only like bad, but it's also a Hex perk, so it's like double bad, and that's why, as you can see, basically nobody uses it unless they're going for Hag's achievement. So I think the new Hex the Third Seal is going to really be worthy of being a Hex perk, and it might be one of the new scariest perks in the game. A Hex that hinders the survivor's senses. Hitting a survivor with a basic or a special attack while the Hex totem is active applies the blindness, oblivious, and hearing status effects. So now you have no aura reading at all. You're oblivious, so you have no idea where the killer is. And you also have the hearing status effect. And you might be thinking, what the hell is the hearing status effect? Well, it's actually in the game. And the description is the hearing status effect temporarily impairs the hearing of survivors and killers, muffling their audio and playing a high-pitched whistling sound, which sounds horrifically annoying, so maybe not that last part. But as it stands now, as far as I know, this status effect has never actually been used. It's just in the game for some reason. Now they could apply that to this, maybe make it to where there's not a high-pitched tinnitus noise in your ear or something, but otherwise I think that this perk would be really scary and you'd want to get it gone as fast as possible. So if they're running something like the new Corrupt Intervention, you might be in a really rough situation for the first few minutes of the match. Up next, we have Insidious, a perk that was basically used just for basement camping with Bubba, and that was pretty much it. I feel like Insidious is a perk that could be reworked in a lot of different ways, but I wanted to just keep it super simple, make it strong, and also make it a perk that stealth killers would want to use, maybe even more than non-stealth killers. I think that as it stands now, Insidious is a perk you don't use on stealth killers. It's a perk that you try to turn other killers into stealth killers with. So that was what I wanted to do with this change. The new Insidious now makes you completely immune to any survivor or a reading or position revealing perk. So now you have this like second layer of stealth. You're sacrificing a perk slot for it, but I think that it's strong enough that it's actually worth sacrificing a perk slot for if you really are trying to make a build based around stealth. You just don't want to be screwed over by any survivor perks. And yet another super toxic perk, we have Monstrous Shrine. There was literally nothing about this perk that didn't incentivize toxic gameplay. And every change I looked at on Reddit or anywhere else, all it did was incentivize more toxic gameplay, which is people die faster in the basement's stronger, try to put people in the basement. And this is just not the way I wanted to go with this perk, right? I wanted the perk to be more like, if you're taking the time to put a survivor in the basement, you need to be somehow rewarded by the entity, right? Like the entity is going to give you this reward for doing it. So the new Monstrous Shrine is, in my opinion, it's not toxic anymore, and it's actually an incredibly good perk. When hooking a survivor in the basement, the survivor furthest from the basement has their aura revealed to you and suffers from the exposed status effect for 90 seconds. So if you take a survivor in the basement now, you're basically getting this huge reward of, here's this other survivor who's just a chicken on a prairie. Like, he's got no way to get away from you, you know? So you go there and he's screwed. You see his aura and he's exposed. Like, they're not going to get away from you unless they waste an insane amount of pallets and resources trying to do so. Up next, we have Territorial Imperative, another terrible Huntress perk. And I believe I saw it was Odds Darva had a good change for this perk. I want to say it was Odds that I thought was, yeah, that's kind of the way that this perk should work. So the new Territorial Imperative is survivors repairing a generator, searching a chest, sabotaging a hook, or interacting with a killer's object within 14 meters activate killer instinct. So now think of this as like Nurse's Calling, but for like killer's objects. So Plague's fountains, pigs, jigsaw boxes, Freddy's dream bubbles, anything like that, plus like your objects as a killer. And it's only a 14-meter radius, so it's not enormous, but it's strong enough that it's going to give you, but it is strong enough that you're going to get a lot of passive information throughout the game. Lastly, we have Zanshin Tactics, a perk that likes to pride itself as the windows of opportunity, but for killer. And it's just not. People have really tried their hardest to come up with a reason to use this perk, and they still really haven't found a reason to do it. However, I think my change actually does give you a reason. The auras of all pallets, breakable walls, and vault locations are revealed to you within a 32-meter range. Survivors who come within 1 meter of a standing pallet have their aura revealed for 2 seconds. And what that's going to do is it's going to give a lot of benefits to certain killers like Pyramid Head or even stealth killers that don't have a red stain. They can really use that 2 seconds to capitalize on getting a hit in an area where the survivor that they're chasing isn't visible. And beyond that, survivors within a 32-meter range are going to constantly be seen just because they happen to be walking by a standing pallet. So you get passive information and chase utility. And there wraps all the killer buffs. Now we're going on to the survivor perk nerfs, which, well, let's just get into it. If you haven't guessed by now, we are going by alphabetical order. So up first, we have Adrenaline, which is used 11.8% of the time, which is more than I probably would have guessed it was used. Personally, I never had an issue with Adrenaline as a killer main. I never was like, oh my god, these bastards have Adrenaline. It's like, they kind of won the game anyway. I never really felt like it was that big of a deal, but whatever, we gotta cut it. So what do we do to make people not use Adrenaline as much anymore? The new Adrenaline instantly replenishes your exhaustion and raises you from the dying state anytime a survivor dies or when the exit gates are powered. So it's still a strong perk. You could call it an anti-slugging perk, but to be honest, if your survivors are dying around you, that's usually a sign that things are going to hell. So it's like a second chance once, maybe a second chance doesn't really mean that much anymore. But I think that this has potential for some pretty clutch plays, maybe a few trapdoors here and there. Ha ha ha. Anyway, let me know. Would you guys use this perk over the old Adrenaline? And then we have Boon, Circle of Healing. So used still even after all the nerfs almost 12% of the time. In its current form, I'll be honest, again, I don't really have a problem with Circle of Healing anymore, especially because we just got the new anti-Boon perk. But okay, we have to just accept the fact that Circle of Healing is a problematic perk and that people do not want it to exist, so we have to turn it into something that will get used much less. Now, there is something I liked about the original Circle of Healing, which is I felt like it gave solo queue players almost like a Survive with Friends level of sustainability. And it's kind of sad that we might have to sacrifice that because the perk is so strong on Survive with Friends, because they can really use it and synergize it as efficiently as possible and just stack it across an entire map. So the new Circle of Healing grants you plus 50% bonus to all healing speeds, and the auras of injured survivors are shown to the entire team. So whereas the current Circle of Healing gives you a negative 50% benefit from healing like self-care does, this one actually gives you kind of a plus 50%, so it's not quite as savage as will make it, but it is strong enough to where it'll incentivize people to heal you, and you'll see the auras of survivors that are injured within the range. This is going to kind of act as like a way for solo queue players to have that information where they can heal their teammates and keep their teammates alive. Unfortunately, it's going to mean that your teammates have to move off of things like generators to come heal you if you're just standing there doing nothing, but it's something at least. And I think that maybe it's as strong as a survivor perk should be. And then we have Borrowed Time, used 42.38% of the time, a perk that does nothing for you but stops the killer from camping. So I don't know, guys, is camping a problem in DBD? Maybe, who knows? Now, we've already heard the rumors quite extensively that Borrowed Time is going to become a base kit change in DBD, which means that the new Borrowed Time needs to be something kind of completely different, but the name Borrowed Time gives you a lot to work with. And you guys are probably going to think this change is a bit ridiculous, but hear me out. Once you hit the struggle phase on a hook, you will have the option to perform an escape attempt with a 100% chance of unhooking yourself, activating Borrowed Time. You'll be broken for the remainder of the trial, and next time you enter the dying state, the killer will be forced to mori you. So that's also part of the perk, is that the killer has no choice. They're forced to mori you, and you might think that's really annoying. What if I don't want to mori them? That might screw me over, and they might escape the trial because I'm forced to mori some guy while they're all opening the exit gate in my face. And yeah, that's kind of the point. It's like supposed to be like that movie horror cliche of like, you know, the guy coming and sacrificing himself for the team, you know, Borrowed Time. You also might think this is way too strong. A survivor can just pull themselves off the hook now in a struggle phase. That's super annoying. And I hear you on that, but at the same time, this survivor would rather be unhooked than use Borrowed Time. You know what I mean? Like, they're going to be permanently broken, and they're going to get moried the next time they get down, so they can't use something like DS. Keep the fact that you're broken in mind, because that's going to be important for another perk change coming up. And then, of course, we have Dead Hard, the most used perk in the game, used over 50% of the time. It's problematic in like two ways, because one, yeah, it's insanely strong against certain killers. It really is. It just completely destroys certain killers. But there's also certain killers like Nerfs, for instance, where without Dead Hard, you're just kind of screwed. So I wanted to keep some element of Dead Hard what it is, but maybe nerf things around it to make it less appealing. The new Dead Hard. Press the active ability button while running to dash forward. Activating Dead Hard inflicts the hemorrhage and mangled status effects. If suffering from the broken status effect, you avoid damage during the dash. So this is a very savage nerf to Dead Hard, because first of all, you no longer avoid damage for free. You have to have the broken status effect in order to gain that attribute. So already the perk has way less utility. Activating Dead Hard now inflicts the hemorrhage and mangled status effects. So I like the idea that when you use Dead Hard, you're making your injuries worse. It won't make using Dead Hard just this completely for free thing that you can do over and over again. You're also not going to be able to use Dead Hard to entirely cuck abilities anymore. Like, you can't just Dead Hard through a hatchet or Dead Hard through a killer swing. All these things that used to be kind of annoying are gone now. You literally have to use Dead Hard just for the distance. Now, the broken status effect comes in because, hey, now you can still use this with no mither, and you can still kind of have that stronger variation of Dead Hard, but the killer will know you have it because you're broken. So there's not this element of like surprise to it. It's like, oh yeah, they're broken, so they have that invulnerability. I need to take that into consideration. I think that you would see Dead Hard be way less effective with this change, even though it's small. I'd look forward to kind of seeing how it played out. Hopefully BHVR is able to actually code that. I don't know. I think they did maybe mention something in the past where there's a problem with how Dead Hard works and why the iframes are there in the first place, but we'll see. Up next, we have Decisive Strike, a perk that's used 27.53% of the time and does nothing for you outside of anti-tunnel. So I don't know, guys, is there a tunneling problem in the game? Maybe. Now, Decisive Strike is another hard perk to nerf because it essentially does one thing, which is it stops the killer from tunneling you out of the game. And if the Decisive Strike's not in the game, then killers would just tunnel everyone out of the game every match, pretty much. I mean, let's be honest, that's pretty much what would happen. So I had to keep that in mind. when making this change. If behavior did something to stop tunneling passively in the game, I don't know how they would ever achieve that, honestly, but in the meantime, we have the new Decisive Strike. If you were the last survivor to be hooked, complete a skill check when grabbed by the killer to immediately stab the killer in the jugular to kill them and end the trial. I think this is just a more simple version of Decisive Strike. It gets to the point, you don't have to worry about it anymore. Killer's dead, move on to the next match. I'm joking. All right, the actual Decisive Strike change. After using Decisive Strike, the killer will be able to moor you next time you are put into the dying state. Decisive Strike is deactivated once the exit gates are powered, so no more endgame Decisive Strikes. Decisive Strike deactivates if entering a locker while broken. And the reason you can no longer enter a locker with the broken status effect is so that you cannot combo this with Deliverance or the new version of Borrowed Time. You have to make a go for it, and if you get downed, then, well, you got to suffer whatever consequences you might have to suffer. Now, this still works the same way it would originally. It's all the same things, like if you touch a generator, blah, 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 it deactivates. It's just this new idea that the killer has the option to moor you next time you're put into the dying state. You might be thinking, what the hell is the point of that? Isn't that just going to make tunneling more delicious? And no, it's not going to make tunneling more delicious. The intention is that you can't use Decisive Strike as an offensive move anymore, because what happens often at high MMR games is survivors will use Decisive Strike as an offensive attack on you. They will like literally get in your face, force you to grab them, blah, 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 just so they can Decisive Strike you on their first hook. And now there's going to be a cost for that. The intention is to push Decisive Strike more into a place where it's just used for anti-tunnel and not for an offensive or bullying or whatever type of thing that it would be used for. It's just to keep you from getting tunneled. And you might think, well, now killers are going to be able to hook everybody immediately and put them to second stage because no one's going to want to use their Decisive Strike until they hit stage 2. So that's going to be a problem, right? And you would be right if it wasn't for another perk change coming up a little bit later. So keep that in mind. Don't start typing out an angry comment just yet. Up next, we have Iron Will, a perk that's actually used even more than Decisive Strike, 30.67% of the time. Lowers the volume of grunts of pain by 100%. So that was it. It was a very simple perk, but it's insanely strong. And it's always just that perk that you can throw on as like, I don't know what fourth perk to use. Boom, Iron Will every time. It's super helpful passively. You don't have to put any thought into it. It just helps you. So I wanted to change that aspect of it. I wanted to make the perk something you actually had to think about and consider. So how I did that is simple. While injured, press the active ability button to become 100% silent for 20 seconds. Causes the exhausted status effect for 50 seconds. So now Iron Will is an exhaustion perk. You actually have to sacrifice something if you want to use it, which is going to make it more used for things like stealth builds or clutch moments where you really need to stay silent. And since it's not as common anymore, killers won't be as vigilant for it, so you might get away with more silent plays than you would have in the past. I think this is a needed change for Iron Will to keep people from using it, but still keeping the cool effect of having complete stealth in the game. Then we have Prove Thyself. Now, Prove Thyself is a problematic perk. It's banned from like every tournament in existence, even though it's only used like 10% of the time, which is still a lot if you consider that the majority of perks aren't used at all. And when coming up with a change for Prove Thyself, I wanted to keep in mind that like Dwight is supposed to be like the team leader, right? Like all of his perks are kind of like based around being like this team organizer, team leader. And I felt like it would be a cool idea if Dwight had a perk about not giving up hope, like when you're losing. So the new Prove Thyself is when a survivor dies, Prove Thyself activates for the rest of the trial. For each generator left, the remaining survivors gain a 10% increase to repair speed up to a maximum of 50%. Prove Thyself does not stack with other instances of itself. So now, say you have a teammate rage quit in the first 10 seconds of the game. Normally that match is over because a guy quit. There's no way you can possibly do 5 generators, which is 3 people. It's just not going to happen. But that's not really the case anymore, because now all the survivors are going to be doing every generator twice as fast at the beginning of the game. They complete a generator, it goes down to 40%. They complete a generator, it goes down to 30%. So the further into a game you are, the less value you get out of the perk, but it's going to be insanely helpful in other matches where your teammates have either given up or just died somehow early on in a game. It's not a complete wash anymore. You actually have that chance to make a comeback. Then we have self-care, and it honestly feels a little bit like nerfing self-care is like nerfing killer, because self-care in my opinion has always been such kind of like a bad perk that nerfing it, it's just like, I don't know why, but if it's really used so often, we got to do what we got to do, right? So the new self-care unlocks the self-care ability, allowing survivors to self-care exclusively in the corner of the map without a medkit while making very loud and inappropriate moaning noises. So now we get that real self-care action. I'm joking. Okay. You should realize this by now that I'm joking. Okay, so the new self-care makes you immune to the deep wound health state as well as the hemorrhage and mangled status effects. I think that this is a pretty cool perk, and it does enough that you might actually get value out of it in a match. I think a lot of perks that are very niche, you think, what's the chance of me actually getting to use this perk in any way? But if it does this many things, I think it's going to help you, and I think it might be needed because Legion is overused right now. Like, he's the most used killer in the game. I think people are going to get annoyed with him, and if there isn't some kind of perk to make people chill out from the amount of legions they're playing against, they might end up nerfing Legion again, which would be really like, meh, like how many times do we want to do this? So now we have self-care, a perk that gives you kind of like a Legion counter. And yeah, you know, screw you, Legion, you annoying ass bitch. Self-care also synergizes very well now with Dead Hard, as you'll be immune to things like hemorrhage and mangled. But I think anytime you have to use two perks to accomplish one thing, it makes sense. Whereas when you have one perk that just does all of these things for you, it's kind of ridiculous. And then we have Spine Chill, a perk that is like insanely underrated, even though it's used 20% of the time. Like, the amount of value you get out of Spine Chill in one perk made no sense to me. I feel like in its current form, it would probably be fine with the change I made to Insidious, but whatever, we gotta nerf this thing, right? So let's put it down. While injured, get notified when the killer is looking in your direction and standing within a 36-meter range. While Spine Chill is active, skill check trigger odds are increased by 10% and success zones are reduced by 10%. So this is a savage nerf to this perk. First, you have to be injured in order for it to even work, and then it doesn't give you the action speed buff anymore. I mean, it could, but the idea is to get rid of this insane vaulting speed. It's fun for Survivor, but it's a little bit too obnoxious in my opinion, especially when it's combined with Dead Hard, which let's be honest, it's always combined with Dead Hard. So no more Spine Chill annoying. It's being used for what it's intended for, which is a beginner perk to keep you from having a heart attack when there's a killer coming your direction, but it only works when you're injured, so it won't overly make you a coward and make you hide in like a bush just because the killer looked in your direction for 2 seconds while you're healthy. All right, there, deal with it. Windows of Opportunity. Now, Windows of Opportunity I always thought was like a really good perk way before its buff. It's a perk that I think is really crucial for newer players, because this game is not easy for newer players, and this is the #1 perk I would recommend to new players who start this game. It just gives you so much information on where to go and blah 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 blah. So how do I change this perk then? Well, I just rein it in a little bit, so I'm meeting it halfway. Now, though, it works the same way it does right now. The only difference is you get the cooldown back from before. So it still has the increased range of the new Windows of Opportunity, but it has the cooldown of the old Windows of Opportunity, and I think that's a fair mix to make the perk still really strong, but also make it to where you have to use your brain a little bit, because in its current form, the game plays itself for you. Like, you literally see where every vault and where every pallet is, and you don't have to even make a mental check for a second. It's just there always. I think this will be a little bit more reined in and fair and still make you actually have to use your brain. All right, guys, so there you have it. The Survivor perk nerfs. Do you think they were savage enough? We still have some more Survivor perk changes coming that will synergize a little bit with some of these changes, so don't completely lose your mind just yet. Let's get to the Survivor perk reworks and buffs. Up first, we have Blood Pact, a perk that was kind of just insane. It's like reading an essay, just trying to figure out what this perk does and all the requirements for it. It was super complicated and annoying, and I was like, all right, whatever, let's throw this thing out. It's literally never used. So now the new Blood Pact, the first survivor you unhook, you form a Blood Pact with. When that survivor reaches their death hook state, they will instead be sent back to their second hook state, and you will lose one of your own hook states in their place. If you have no spare hook states, the survivor will die as normal. there can only be one blood pack per trial. So you can't have 4 people running blood pack and then just like make it this super annoying thing where you have to get 12 hooks every match. The intention of this perk is for somebody to put it on that is playing with someone who's not as good as they are, and they know that that person usually gets tunneled out first or they die first. If you're a really like sweaty solo player as well and you feel like your teammates die really fast, you can also use this perk just to maybe keep your teammates in the match a little bit longer as well. I think that this version of Blood Pact is really cool and people would actually use it. Buckle Up, the least used perk in the entire game. Buckle Up, I don't even really know what the intention was. It was supposed to be like an anti-slugging perk, almost like a kindred for slugging. And I was like, okay, if you want to make a perk that is supposed to be the kindred for slugging, then let's make this thing the kindred for slugging. The recovery progress of dying survivors can be determined by the intensity of their auras at a distance up to 48 meters, just like the current Buckle Up. But in addition to that, while you are in the dying state, the killer's aura is revealed to all other survivors within a 16-meter range. While a survivor other than you is in the dying state, the killer's aura is revealed to you within a 16-meter range. So it's like Kindred, but you don't see the auras of all the other survivors as well. You just see the killer, whether it's you who's down or it's a teammate that's down. You're getting that information and you're giving that information to your team. I think this is a really good perk for solo, but you know, Kindred's still used in Survive with Friends. I think this could be used in Survive with Friends as well. It's a pretty cool perk and it gives you a lot of information at a crucial time. And you might be looking at that and going, is that Kindred? No, that's Déjà Vu, a perk that you probably don't even know exists. It's used as 0.42% of the time, and the auras of the 3 generators in the closest proximity to one another are revealed to you for 60 seconds at the start of a trial. So it's like a I don't want to get 3-gen perk. I think we already have enough of those types of perks in the game. You know, we got Visionary, we got Rookie Spirit. We have enough of these generator seeing perks, so let's change it up and turn Déjà Vu into a perk that's more helpful for newer players. When passing through an area where the killer has performed a break action, you see the killer's current aura for 3 seconds. Déjà Vu has a cooldown of 90 seconds. I think this is going to be a really nice perk for newer players. It's a base kit perk. Good survivors will use this too every once in a while because it's still a decent perk. You're going to get a lot of information on where the killer's at all times unless they're running Insidious. Now we have Off the Record, uses 0.27% of the time, and the issue with Off the Record is that it was like a perk that already existed in other ways way better. So it was just like a redundant perk. So I wanted to make it kind of have its own identity. And Killer Mains, I know you're going to get a little triggered by this one, but you no longer make grunts of pain while in the dying state. And you might freak out and be like, but don't forget that anytime this has happened in the past, it's been a bug. Now you know it's not a bug. So you down the person, you don't hear them. You're going to know they have Off the Record, and you're going to have to make that choice there and then. Do I pick this survivor up, or do I risk them maybe crawling away and I can't find them? In a way, it's an anti-slugging perk and an anti-tunneling perk as well. If they think you might have DS and they leave you there on the ground, boom, you crawl away. They're not going to find you without some kind of ability that allows them to find you. Up next, we have Poised with 0.07% usage, a completely dead perk. And what it does is after generator is completed, you will not leave any scratch marks for the next 10 seconds. And for some reason, I already know there's going to be a guy in the comments who's like, actually, Poised is my favorite perk. I use it in every game. Well, you know, that's great. But we need to make perks for other people too, Timmy. God. All right. While in the healthy state, you gain the following abilities. Your actions no longer are interrupted from a basic attack. You can no longer be grabbed by the killer while performing a hook rescue, repairing a generator, opening an exit gate, or interacting with a totem. So now Poise is really going to give you that poise that you would see in something like, you know, other games. You're going to be able to do things like get a hook rescue without worrying about the killer being able to grab you off of the hook. I think this perk actually has real utility now, and people will use it, as annoying as it might be for killers. But you know, guys, killers understand that perks have to do something. Like, I know, like, anytime you make a perk change to a survivor perk, every single time killers get angry about it because it does something. It's like, guys, like, yeah, like, survivor perks are gonna do things. Like, I'm sorry, like, what do you want survivor perks to be? They have to do something in the game. Like, chill, just relax. Then we have Not Spine Chill, aka Premonition, a perk that is not spine chill, and it's used at 0.55% of the time. You receive an auditory warning when looking in the killer's direction. Blah, 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 blah. Who cares? It's not spine chill. So the new Premonition, when the killer detects your heartbeat through killer instinct, their aura is revealed to you within a 24-meter range. And I think this is really cool because it's only killer instinct. So, you know, it's a big middle finger to Legion. But, you know, it could also be a counter to something like the new Territorial Imperative. It's just going to give you different utility over Spine Chill. And I think it's a cool perk that shits in Legion's face, which is good, let's be honest. Then we have Slippery Meat. And I just could not find any good ideas for Slippery Meat, honestly. Like, no matter how much I looked, every change to Slippery Meat either just was like, hey, you know what, I think Trapper needs to be nerfed. And you know, guys, Trapper doesn't need to be nerfed. He's not that good already. Or it was another pull yourself off the hook chance increase buff. Blah, boring. So I wanted to make this perk actually interesting. You have developed an efficient way to get off hooks. Grants up to 3 extra escape attempts off the hook. Hook escape attempts have a 4% increased chance to succeed. So it still does the same exact thing as the old, but in addition, you now get unhooked 25% faster and no longer cause a noise notification when being unhooked or unhooking yourself. So if you're hooked in like the basement and someone comes down and pulls you off the hook, the killer won't get that noise notification. And if they're not paying close enough attention, boom, you guys are out of the basement. The killer doesn't even realize you got unhooked. I think it's a pretty cool perk, and it might be better than people realize. Then we have Soul Survivor, a completely dead perk from Laurie Strode. The original Soul Survivor just made it to where the killer would have a harder time seeing your aura the more of your teammates that were dead. And we all know that in Dead by Daylight, when your teammates are dead, you're dead. It doesn't matter if the killer can see your aura or not. And I think this change was heavily inspired from Oddstarva's idea, if I remember correctly. As long as you are the obsession, you cannot be directly murdered by the killer until you are the last survivor. Mori's, Tombstone Myers, Rites of Judgment, Devour Hope, Rancor, anything like that, you cannot be moried or killed unless you're the last survivor standing. And what this is going to do is not only be a cool perk, it's going to synergize with my change to Decisive Strike, because now if you're running Soul Survivor and Decisive Strike, both Laurie Strode perks, the killer will not be able to more you even on your first hook, which would mean that Decisive Strike would basically be the same as it is right now if you run 2 perks instead of 1, which I think is kind of cool, especially since they're both from the same survivor. And it's going to give that killer that idea that, shit, should I pick them up? I don't know. They might have Soul Survivor as well. And that's all a read that the killer's going to have to make, maybe based on other perks they've already seen you use, now knowing that you need 2 perks and not just 1 to achieve that. And also, it's just a cool perk, guys. Like, you know what I mean? Next up, we have This Is Not Happening with 0.51% usage, very low. And it's kind of weird because I think that this isn't that bad of a perk. I mean, I wouldn't run it normally, but I think for certain challenges and certain meme builds, it actually is an okay perk. But as you can see, it just doesn't get used enough. So we need to make it do something way more unique. While injured and being chased, the killer gains Bloodlust 100% slower. So for all of you survivors out there that just loathe Bloodlust, here is your perk. You can now run this and you will not have to deal with Bloodlust nearly as much as you would have in the past. The only reason I didn't make the perk get rid of Bloodlust altogether was just for very rare instances where you might have a newer killer getting completely trolled by certain survivors. So that's the only reason. And a perk that would get used definitely more in my opinion. Then we have Ante Up. Another Oddstarva change. I'm not gonna lie, guys. Oddstarva came up with some really good ideas for survivor buff perks. So the original Ante Up didn't really do much at all. It gave you a little bit of extra luck, which allowed you to have a better chance of pulling yourself off the hook, but even then it didn't usually work. So when repairing a generator without a toolbox, skill check trigger odds are increased by 10%, with success zones being reduced by 40%. Increased 3% progression on great skill checks, increased 3% regression on failed skill checks. So this really sticks true to the name of like Ante Up. You're putting a wager on harder skill checks where you get more progression for succeeding and you lose more for losing. A real true ace perk. I think this is really cool. And once I saw this change, like I said, from Oddstarva, I just couldn't. It was what? Like, you gonna come up with a better idea? Are you? Let me know. Well, there you have it, guys. 40 perk changes. I honestly don't understand how Odds does this stuff so often. This video took me so long to make. So what do you guys think? Are you okay with some of these changes? Are you fearful of the actual perk changes? Myself, I'd say that I think the perk changes are necessary for better or worse. After checking out the statistics, it was pretty revealing seeing how many perks in DBD are basically never used. Like, the majority of perks in the game are not ever touched, and they're not even all that bad. It's just that there's either perks that do the same thing but better, or perks that are deemed as required to even having a fighting chance. At the end of the day, I'm just looking forward to new metas no matter what. I'm really interested in what you all think about this, and as always, thanks for watching and have a good one.